time together. We're going to talk about some really tough topics, topics about return to work, topics about the mental and physical and emotional and financial strains of long-term unemployment, topics about very specific advice to get back in. Our whole goal at an event like this one, for anyone who's been to any of our events, is to give you something super actionable to do by the end of it. I listen in on a lot of events. I attend many of the same ones you guys attend, and I think there's plenty of good advice out there, and you guys are going to take plenty of notes. Our goal here is not only to give you a couple of pages full of notes, but some very specific things to do after this and very specific actions to take, because that is how we are all going to move forward. So thank you everyone for joining. For those who don't know me, my name is Adriel. I'm the CEO of Riveter. We're a free community and toolkit for people to prepare for their interviews. So if anyone hasn't checked out what's available at riveterworks.com, please do. More importantly, we're here to talk about this specific topic of how to re-enter the workforce, how to handle long-term unemployment, how to really get out of it better than you were before. There's really one line that I love to say particularly often, which is a gap on your resume is not a gap in your life. Oftentimes it feels that way. Oftentimes the frustrations are real. Oftentimes it seems like it's unclear how you're supposed to get out of the condition you're in and move forward. However, something we're going to talk about plenty today is how to take this gap on your resume and how to spin it both for yourself as well as for the people you're selling to or speaking to, being recruiters, hiring managers, companies, how this gap in your resume could actually make your entire life, personal and professional, a much more remarkable, rewarding experience. And that is particularly a topic we're going to spend some time on. First, I would encourage everyone to visit the site I'm about to drop in here. This is the event page for today's event. What you will find there, that's where you registered, is a list of everybody's LinkedIn from today's event. So it's in there. You can open it up and connect with folks later, but it's a nice, easy way for people to just connect with each other and just say, hey, I was at the Riveter event as well. I would love to connect and chat. And there's a nice way to build the network. As we go along, I'm going to ask our speakers to drop in their LinkedIns. So it'll be a nice opportunity to connect with them as well, because the more connections you can make, the more specific requests you can have for people, the more they can help you get where you want to get. And all three of our speakers today have been doing this for decades. They have really, really focused their entire careers on giving very actionable, specific advice and working with folks like yourselves. So let's get into it. Again, thank you for joining. My name is Adriel. Please feel free to connect with each other and let's get going. So our first speaker today, I want to introduce Mimi Moss from ReachHire. She's going to tell us a little bit about herself, a little bit about ReachHire, and then talk about a couple of specific aspects about what they do and some advice that she might give. So Mimi, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Adriel. So happy to be here. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet everybody. So my name is Mimi Moss. I am a program director at ReachHire. I've been a program director at ReachHire for just about 7 years now. Previous to that, I took a 10-year voluntary career break to raise my 2 children as my spouse was traveling and working full time. And previous to that, in the agency recruiting, nonprofit, and education space. So as many of you can probably relate to, my career has been quite the jungle gym and not the straight line. So again, it's great to be with so many like-minded individuals. And a little bit about ReachHire, we create returnship programs for people that have taken a voluntary career break. So that could be because you did what I did, is raise children, could be for illness, relocation from another country, another state, you're waiting to get your work visa, or you're helping somebody else navigate an illness. There are many different reasons that people take career breaks. And what we do is we introduce them to large companies and recruit them for specific 6-month programs for roles that they may not have otherwise been considered for because of their career break. And then through those programs, we provide coaching and support. And it's more of a trial period, see how you like the company, how the company likes your work. And then at the conclusion of that 6 months, there's an opportunity to potentially convert to full-time position. And that's a little bit about me and ReachHire.
Awesome. Mimi, question for you, personal question. When you decided that it was time for you to get back into the workforce, what were some of the first steps that you took after you said, hey, my kids are 10 years old or whatever they were at the time, it's time for me to get back in? What were some of the first steps that you took to begin your job search, and what was that experience like for you?
Well, it was scary. I'll be honest with you. It was really intimidating. I didn't know where to start. And someone gave me the advice to just talk to people that know you. It doesn't even have to be from a work environment. So my network was old. I mean, these were people that I hadn't connected with in 10 years. So of course I had to create a LinkedIn account. I had to connect with them on LinkedIn. And not only talking to them, but talking to people who were in my kids, parents in my kids' preschool class, or people that I knew from volunteer work that I had done, family members, and ask them, what do you think I'm good at? Because I really didn't know where to start. And a lot of the jobs that I had done in the past, I didn't even know what that would translate into. And the job search was so different than what it was when I had been last searching. So I just sat down and had coffee with as many people as I could and talked to them. First of all, letting them know that I was looking. The more people that know, the better. And then asking them where they saw me in the work environment and what they thought my strengths were. And then from there, I started a more curated job search.
Awesome. So one specific question for you, Mimi, and then we're going to go to Anne and Lauren. But Mimi, particularly for women who have taken, or for parents who have taken a break for parenting, I want to ask what your advice is about how to translate the skills learned as a parent into resumes, LinkedIn profiles, interviews, and the workforce. What is your advice? Because now for 7 or so years at ReachHire, you've been doing exactly that, helping people translate skills from a non-traditionally professional environment like parenting into a job. What are some things that you think only parents and exclusively parents have learned that translate really, really well into traditional jobs and workforces?
So a couple of things, which I always recommend you address in an interview or in a conversation versus maybe listing it under, maybe in the LinkedIn profile, but we can get to that later. But I love to think about it as multitasking, right? I mean, a parent multitasks and juggles, and also a diversity of thought. So someone who has been out of the workforce has a different perspective on a day-to-day work environment or a day-to-day task than maybe someone that hasn't. So that life perspective and that life experience is really valuable to say to maybe a team that might be 10 or 20 years younger than you. Say, hey, let's take a step back here. Like, let's not overthink this. And what does this really mean? And really come to the table with a more high level strategic view of things. Because I know that the me before I was a parent, everything was an emergency. Everything was the end of the world. Everything, oh my gosh, my life is over. But you know what? There are more important things to think about than maybe what this slide is going to look like or what this deliverable is going to look like. So I think that kind of diversity of thought and more high level thinking has, to me, really has been valuable to me. And also that's a lot of the coaching that I give people, and that's really able to translate into them being a more efficient worker.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things we're going to spend a lot of time on today is how do you communicate what you talked about, right? How do you communicate well what the advantages of multitasking or the diversity of thought or things like that bring in? So thank you very much, Mimi. And I dropped your LinkedIn as well as ReachHire's website into the account. We'll bring you back in throughout the conversation. So thank you. Let's go to Anne and Lauren. So in that order, very briefly, can you please introduce yourselves, your companies, and then we'll jump into our conversation.
Yeah, hi, I'm Anne Reiling. I work for a company called Lucas Group. We're an executive search firm based out of Atlanta, Georgia, where we focus on mid to C-level roles. I've been in the recruitment space for, I guess, my entire career. I've recently made a transition within the company to move from recruitment into running the marketing and sales enablement for our team. I've worked with hundreds of people who are coming back into the workforce, who are switching, who are changing, so lots of counsel around the best way to make that happen. And I'm super excited to be here. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And we'll get into a bunch about how people can leverage recruiters as well as mentors, which is how I actually met Anne. I read one of her blog posts about mentorship. So we'll definitely talk a little about that. Lauren, you and I have known each other for about 8 beautiful months. It feels like forever though. Please introduce yourself and the work you do with Impact as well as Earn Your Worth.
Great, thanks. Hi, everybody. Really glad to be here. I'm Lauren Herring. I'm CEO of Impact Group. We have about 30 years of experience in career and leadership coaching, and our main focus is on the B2B space. We have 3 main areas of focus on the coaching side where we help with corporate relocation. So some of the people that are returning from an international assignment or another corporate sponsored relocation, we actually help the spouse with employment support and coaching in that process. We support outplacement. So as part of a severance package, we support individuals in their career search. And then we also do a broader leadership development and executive coaching. We recently started a consumer division called Earn Your Worth Careers. And that is focused specifically on helping people earn their worth doing work they love. We have, as a women-owned business, we have a little bit of an angle towards women, but we work with everybody. And just are excited to work with people who are wanting to invest in themselves in their next step through coaching.
Awesome. Beautiful. And then Lauren is also the author of a book that I read and enjoyed called Take Control of Your Job Search. I'll drop a link to that a little bit later, but I really enjoyed it myself when I read it last summer. So, Anne, let's start with you. Can you please provide, just to set the baseline a little bit, actually, before I ask the question, folks, if you can actually, as you have questions throughout the event, feel free to drop them in the chat. I will be guiding the conversation, but if you have questions, as you have questions, drop them in the chat. If you don't want people to know that it's you who had the question, feel free to message me directly. I won't mention your name and I'll just ask the question on your behalf. And that way it will be safer. Also, just so I can get to know and we can customize the conversation, please message me. Feel free to do it privately or drop it into the public chat and tell me how long you've been job searching. Whether it's months or years, I know people are at a couple different places, but how long has it been since your last job, I guess is a better way to put it. Feel free to message me directly so folks don't necessarily have to know, and that'll provide some context. So, Anne, tell me first, I want to understand, what is it, you're a recruiter, and as a recruiter, what do you see differently about a candidate who just got laid off a week or a month ago versus a candidate who hasn't had a traditional job in upwards of a year? As a recruiter, how might you think about that or approach those two kinds of people differently?
So, I think it's interesting because the last year that we've had, I'm probably answering this question a little bit differently today than maybe I would have 365 days ago, right? The world has changed in a tremendous way. And that's not just Washington, D.C. or not just a particular industry, like legitimately the world has changed. So I think that, at the end of the day, if someone has been out of search for a period of time, to me, the piece that I'm always looking for is kind of understanding why, right? And so, and I think as the time gets longer, right, and I think anything kind of less than a year, things don't change too dramatically. But if you start to look at somebody who has a 2, 3, 4, 5-year gap, what I'm looking for if I'm doing my HR search is, programs change very quickly and technology changes very quickly. And, so some of those pieces where it's like, hey, I'm looking for someone who can come in and make an impact right away, that piece is going to be harder. And there's nothing, you can't just go get ADP, experience without working in ADP. So some of that I think is difficult to overcome if it's a very, systems technology piece with the length of time that you're out. So I think it comes down to showing like, how have you explain to me how you've used that time. And so one of the things that I used to, or very early on in my career, like with gaps, if I didn't understand them, right, like we're humans, we create the worst case scenario, right? So if I see a year off and there's no explanation for it, my brain is going to go to, well, they probably got busted for something, and then this happened, and then I'm going to create some super fun, dramatic, Netflix worthy story, when in reality, I took time, someone took time off to take care of their mother, or took time off to be with children, or had a legitimate, unreal reason. And so I think sometimes people are afraid it's hard, right? There's something very vulnerable about saying, hey, this is why I'm doing this. And, and they're afraid, is this going to look like an excuse, or, how do I control that message? But in my mind, the vulnerability and the clarity and the explanation of this is what I've been doing and this is how I've been managing allows the recruiter, right? They don't have to spend time creating a story. They can just react and respond and say, oh, actually, I don't have to wonder about this person's story. I can look at all the accomplishments that they've done or all the skills that they've had. So hopefully that was a very long-winded answer that gave some detail.
No, I think it does. And you mentioned some of the things that's definitely either in the back or the front of our own minds, which is how will I be seen? What are the stories people are making up? Which, look, they're very real. As much as like the entire American capitalistic system is talking more about inclusivity and diversity, most people still are thinking, well, why exactly was this person unemployed for that long? And that is real. And you've got to admit that reality so that you can then conquer it. Lauren, I want to ask you a similar question, except with a slightly different context. As a coach, and look, I'm reading some of the messages that folks have sent me: unemployed for 8 months, a year, 14 months, 8 months, 6 months, 16 months, took time off for parenting, job searching for 2 months, 8 months, 8 months. So that looks like between like 8 months and 2 years really seems to be what's going on here. Only gig work since 2008 due to a disability. So folks are really in a few different places here. Lauren, with Impact Group as an outplacement service, predominantly, that means that you are working with people in the first, 1 to 4 or so months of their job search, where there's still hope. They just got back, right? Like, that's okay, I can do it. And you're doing your best during that time. Now, you're working with people who need you at any stage, right? And with Earn Your Worth, it's women who say, hey, I need some career search, and they could be job searching for any amount of time. What do you say differently to somebody who got let go last week, was sent your way? Lauren, I need some job search advice. It's been a while. Versus somebody who comes to you and says, Lauren, it's been 2 years since my last job. I need your help. What advice would you give? How do you approach those two kinds of people differently?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think the core element of the job search is going to be similar in each case. I'd advise people to focus on what I call the high value activities of the job search, which is around your personal brand and getting clear, similar to like what Mimi was talking about. What am I good at it? How do I articulate the value that I bring to an organization? And then networking. And so, yes, I'm not saying don't spend time on the job boards. I'm saying be smart about how you use the job boards as a starting point, and then how do you network your way into opportunities. So those things I would say as like a starting point for any sort of basic job search guidance. That is true no matter where you are in the search. The emotional part is going to be obviously the big difference. Sometimes if you've just gotten laid off, there's grief, there's frustration, there's anger. And so really taking the time to own that, and not necessarily, if you're in the middle of some of those emotions, go straight into a job search. Chances are you might make some mistakes along the way in that situation. But then on the flip side, you don't want to wait too long. I mean, I am very familiar with an individual who was laid off from a senior level role, and it was the early summer. She said, you know what, I'm going to spend the time with my daughter. We're going to make the most of it. But, especially, the higher you get, the longer the job searches are. So she ended up in the market for 1.5 years, and she kind of wasted the first 4 months. And so I think being real clear about, making sure that you're not squandering some of that valuable early time, despite the fact that we all want to say, yeah, take your time, enjoy yourself. You have a severance, don't worry about it. But on the other hand, the longer it goes, like Anne was saying, then we create stories. So what I would be advising the longer term individuals is to, of course, be paying attention to your emotions, but then you also need to be able to compartmentalize those so they're not driving the bus, because in that situation, you can start creating all sorts of worst case scenarios. And then that's going to be taking over the prefrontal cortex. That is where you need to be doing your logical thinking. So in those situations, I definitely advise having some very focused action plans around what you need to be doing to keep you on task and keep your brain from creating those worst case scenarios. And then I'd also go maybe take a moment to go back to the drawing board. And I don't know whether that happens at 6 months or, a year. I think it's going to be different for everybody. But if you start to feel like this is going on longer than I anticipated, and of course, in a pandemic, it's a little bit of a different situation too, but, be real honest with yourself about the skills that you're bringing to bear, about, the salary expectations, am I doing something wrong? And, am I getting the right kind of feedback to be clear about what's going well and what's not going well? And, how do I need to recalibrate in this search? Whether that's in terms of how I'm presenting myself or the kinds of things that I'm looking for.
Yeah, Lauren, go ahead, Anne.
I just have a quick, so it's interesting because I so much of what you said made sense to me. And I think one of the things that I hear people say all the time is like, well, I'm treating my job search like a full-time job. And I'm like, well, stop doing that, because that's exhausting, right? And it is such an emotional freaking roller coaster, right? It would be like if you were single and you woke up every day and you were like, today I'm finding a husband, like, this is it, like, it's happening. Like, no, that is not how it works. And so I think you have to, you have to be serious. You have to have a plan, right? Like, and you want to execute on that plan, but like, people burn out, and I see it all the time where they call me and I'm like, no, like, actually, I won't help you until you take a week off and like, don't look at the job boards and don't tweak something and don't think about what's wrong with yourself. You need to take some time to like get back to being excited about this, because one of the things, being on the other side of the desk for so many years is that like, you can feel that, right? Whether someone's saying something or not, like you can tell whether someone's excited or whether they're exhausted. And if someone feels exhausted with the job search, like that comes through. So it was interesting to, Lauren, to hear you say some of that, because it just, I think that's something that it goes kind of to that first piece you said of like, if you're angry, like it will come out. If you're tired, it will come out. If you're frustrated, it will come out. Like, and so just being conscious of giving yourself some space to like, not always be on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of the exact story of how I got the idea for the book, Take Control of Your Job Search, the 10 emotions you must master to land the job. So the book is all about mastering the ups and downs of that roller coaster. And the story was that I was talking to a senior executive and he was throwing the kitchen sink at me you want this spreadsheet, you want this brochure, you want this bio. And it was a networking meeting, but it was one of those things where I was just kind of blown away, like, okay, back off, dude. And
I feel like I might know him. No.
But it was so interesting because I think in his mind, he felt like I'm being proactive, I'm taking initiative, I'm showing how competent I am. How it came across was desperate, and that fear was driving his search. And I'm thinking, wow, if this top level C-level executive is coming across this way, and he's in sales, is in the book, to kind of protect his anonymity, I made him a CFO, but he was in sales, and I'm like, he should know how to manage his emotions, in front of an audience, and he couldn't. And so, there was no way that an employer was going to sit across from the desk from him and be like, oh yes, like you have the perfect demeanor to fit our culture.
Yeah. I'm actually, Lauren, I was right after Anne spoke, I was about to say, so Lauren, tell me about your book, because I read it and you talk a lot about that. So thank you for bringing it up. And I did want to spend some time on the mental health aspect of the job search, especially as it takes a very long time. And also I see a lot of people have sent me questions or posted them publicly. We're going to get to all those. Keep sending in questions. Thank you very much. I want to spend one more moment on sort of the mental health and the motivational side of it, because it is not to be undervalued, right? We're not a bunch of hippies saying, go take a lot of walks. It's a bunch of recruiters and coaches saying, go take a lot of walks, because it does have some relevance. So I want to go Mimi, then Anne, and then Lauren, just your one bit of actionable sort of motivation, mental wellness, the mental side of this job search. And then we're going to get into most of the rest of our event will be about the tactical side of how to approach this. But therapist Mimi, therapist Anne, therapist Lauren, how would you, what is the mental wellness bit of advice you give somebody who's been searching for, say, 1 year plus, Mimi, then Ann, then Lauren?
Wow, there's so many things, but I think the one thing that I'll focus on is just kind of owning your story. And sometimes you can feel really, I mean, I know that my confidence level was pretty low when I was looking for a job. I just didn't think anyone would hire me. Why would they want me to do something like this? And so I think like owning that and not apologizing and just kind of like feeling like this is who I am, this is me, this is my story, and practicing saying it to yourself in a mirror. I know it sounds silly, saying it to a friend, going for walks and saying it out loud when no one's around, and just practicing speaking with that confidence, and speaking with that presence, and fake it until you make it, or fake it until you become it, whatever that quote is. But it does take practice to, you can practice it on Riveter. I love that. Just to, and the more that you actually say it out loud and smile while you say it, something the more it helps. I know it sounds a little basic, but I do think that it does help in that you know, expressing regret, or you say you're embarrassed, or saying, you know, we all feel that. But I think if you start saying it to yourself, whether it's a daily mantra kind of during meditation, I think the more that you really know it and believe it and weave it into your kind of the way you present yourself. And, you know, like Anne was saying, the last thing that you want to come across as is a desperate, or, you know, just not feeling tired. So that would be my little tidbit.
Yeah, I totally agree. And Paul, thank you for the plug. I'm actually going to talk about how to practice a question like that at the very end, but totally agree, right? That self-confidence, that self-belief, that Superman pose in the mirror, absolutely goes a very long way. And what about you?
So I'm going to cheat, and I have two. The first one is find yourself a cheerleader. And the second is learn to say no, because both of those things I think are super important. You know, and I've been that cheerleader. I've told people, listen, I'm not gonna be able to help you with your job, but like, if you're having a day where you want to flip a desk, like call me and we'll talk through it and get you happy again. And so I think it's really important to find that person. And I think it's really like, the saying no, I can't stress that enough, is that like, you get to say no too, right? Like you get to say, no, that's not enough money. No, that's not enough job. No, that's not right. And I think sometimes when when you're unemployed, it's easy to think like, oh, all I need to do is get it so I can say yes. Well, give yourself a little bit of that control back, and you were a part of this decision as well. So those are my two.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I totally agree, right? Being in control, not showing that desperation, because that is so, so, so important. You can see it. I come from a sales background, and if you have a dry spell as a seller, you're like throwing the kitchen sink of discounts at anybody who will talk to you. Don't worry about it. 8-month free trial. I'll do anything. And it shows, and they're not buying, right? And it takes some serious guts to be able to walk into every meeting with a smile on your face, your hands on your hips, and you're ready to go with that confidence. It is tough. It is a very hard part, but it is so important. And then Lauren, what is your advice? And then we're going to get to some of these tactical questions.
Well, we're here with some very smart panelists, because Mimi took my first one and Anne took my second one. So on Mimi's, I call it harness your inner rock star through getting really clear on your personal brand. Remember what made you great at your last job. Like, what were some of the successes that you had, and own those, and don't go to a meeting thinking, oh, I'm the lowly job seeker. Go in the mindset of the rock star that, was rocking those promotions in, the last time around. Or with Anne's example, I call it a super team. So surround yourself by people who are going to tell you the truth, by people who are going to give you a hug, by people, make sure you have all the bases covered. So if I were to say a third option, then I would focus on just giving yourself grace and not being so hard on yourself whenever things don't work. Like, I have a saying, if you wouldn't say it to a friend, then why in the world would you say it to yourself? And so especially women, but I think everybody in this kind of situation, you know, we can be really, really hard on ourselves. We have that inner critic, and that is going to be super detrimental to being able to move forward successfully. So a little bit of grace and some self-compassion.
Yeah, I like that a lot. You know, I gave a talk this morning. I actually see a couple people from that talk here, so sorry for repeating myself, but about the importance of confidence as you go in for interviews. And I said confidence is broken up into two components. The first is preparation. So doing what Mimi said, going in, practicing, making sure you got your answers down, making sure you're the best prepared person in the room, no matter what else. And the second is self-belief. It's giving yourself those small wins, doing what Lauren just said, which is reminding yourself of your, or what Anne just said, reminding yourself of your accomplishments, or what Lauren just said, giving yourself that grace, but that self-belief of saying, I've got wins, right? Like before unemployment, I was kicking some butt. During unemployment, I'm coaching or volunteering or giving my workout, giving yourself those wins often. So you walk into every interview saying, I'm confident because I'm prepared, and I'm confident because I have wins every single day. Small wins, personal wins, career, whatever they are, I'm a person who wins every single day, and you can walk in with that confidence. So giving yourself those small wins, whether it's finding an alumni from your college to give some advice to or mentor, volunteering somewhere, giving yourself wins is fantastic. So I want to go into some specific questions. There's a few people who actually talked about how to talk about a gap on your resume visually, on a resume or on a LinkedIn. And then we'll talk in a moment about how to do it in an interview. I'm going to go to Anne with that. Anne, you look at more resumes than I think anybody in the world. Probably number one. What do you think people should, how can people talk about, hey, if my last job was in 2019 and I'm applying to you today, what kind of thing might go into that on my resume or on my LinkedIn?
So it's a little bit interesting. You kind of have to look at two different things, right? So there's recruiters, right? There's people like me who are looking wider, right, and not deeper. And then you have people who are actually internal at a company who are, you know, looking for one particular thing, right? And so when someone in my business is first looking at a resume, a cover letter you could probably light on fire, and it wouldn't matter, right? Like the first thing I'm going to is what is on the resume, because I need a snapshot, right? Like I'm trying to get, what are we working with here? But when someone does have a long-term gap, that's where I want the cover letter, right? Because I'm going to sit there and go, okay, well, maybe I need to know a little bit more about this story, right? Like I have some of those questions, and let me see if they cover. If your cover letter is like super generic and super boring and hides the goose, then like, skip it. Like give me a short, brief, like I gotta move. I got moves to make, right? In the recruitment world. I think when you're looking, internally, and you're applying directly to a company, that you got to address it pretty quickly in a cover letter as well, right? Because the challenge there is you've got somebody who maybe doesn't fully understand the role, or maybe doesn't, it could be just kind of a first level screener. So it's really tricky. I would say there's no like super perfect way to do it, right? That it kind of depends. And sometimes you have to think about, like, stop and think, okay, who is my audience? Who is seeing this? How much do I want the job, right? Like, if it's not a job you really want, who cares? Like, don't write the cover, like practice, just like get it out there and see what kind of bite you get back. If it's something where you're like, this is it, like I was put on the planet to be in this job, then yeah, you probably want to go through a little bit more effort to make those connections. And
super specific question on the resume. Let's say my last job was in 2019 and here
Yep.
I am in May of 2021. Would it be better, I don't know if they could give a blanket rule here, but I'm going to ask you and Lauren the same question. Would it be better to say, between November of 2019 and May of 2021, I've been job searching, or like fill in something for that? And if so, what should I fill in? Job searching, volunteering, working on myself, like what should I fill in? Or is it better to leave that blank? And so when a recruiter or hiring manager looks at my resume, they say, oh, my last job was 2019. Between those two options of putting something into that gap, saying I've done something, or just leaving it empty and you saying, oh, I guess last job ended 2019 and here we are 2 years later, what would you say? I know people are thinking that specific thing of like, ooh, am I being dumb for leaving it blank, or am I being dumb for putting something there? I know people have that exact question. So that's the advice I'm looking for.
Yeah, so that's, I don't know. It's really not as simple as saying like it's always yes or it's always no. And that's just I think it's going to depend on your level and what job you had and how specific your skill set was and what you've been doing. Like if you really were like, listen, I took 1.5 years because I just wanted to watch Oprah and like work on myself, then like that's a harder story to tell than if it's like, so it's not like a super easy answer to say it's either always leave it or always not. Like we'll absolutely have roles where, it's a skill set where I'm like, oh my gosh, someone is fluent in this language and has this skill set. And like, I don't really care what their story is because it's such a great match. Oh gosh, I wish I could say that there was like this really easy answer, but there just isn't.
Yeah, if you've done something specific of like, hey, I've been off for this long, but in that time, took this class or worked on this specific.
Yeah, like if there's a certification, right? If there's something that you can talk to that's really like actionable or, specific. I think sometimes, contract work right now, like the job market is bananas. Like it is totally insane how strong the job market has come back right now. So if you've done those contract opportunities or you've been able to find something on a temporary basis, like that's always great to be able to show like, hey, I've been getting back out there and I'm doing a skill set. And so I always think that's great. But sometimes I'll see people like put so much information that it kind of like distracts from what is actually there. So there's that balance between giving enough information that the person is curious, but not so much information that you miss everything else.
Lauren, what do you think?
Yeah, on that last point, to the extent that you can find contract opportunities and I mean, even these days, there's so many opportunities for gig work, even at the professional level, that identifying ways that you can just prove that you're doing something to keep your skills sharp, your mind sharp, you're doing something other than 100% job search all the time, especially the longer it goes, the more you want to be able to demonstrate that you're spending your time doing other things. So I would advocate for putting something in there. I would hesitate to do like volunteer work or things like that. It's more like, what are the specific skill set related items that you can, even if it's like, it doesn't even have to be paid. You can do some projects for a friend. And as long as that person can vouch for you that you helped them in some form or another, then put it on there. I think you can finagle it in a variety of different ways, but personally, I would put project work on there to fill it as best as possible.
Yeah, I want to talk for a minute about parenting as well. I'm going to use actually Mimi to transition on that same question. Mimi, so as part of Reach Hire, you work predominantly, or a big part of it is parents returning to the job market after employment gaps of however long. What do you think somebody should put on their resume? Say, somebody graduated from college, they worked for 10 years, they had a kid, they took 10 years off, now they're looking to come back. How should they describe the last 10 years very, very specifically on a resume or on a LinkedIn profile?
That's a great question. We get it all the time. And I would echo what Ann said, there is no right answer for everybody. So if you're applying to a returnship, you need to prove that you did take a step out of the workforce. So I would highly, and this is what Reach Hire's advice is. So, ultimately it's up to you, but on the resume, I recommend that you make it succinct, but do add something there that you took a step back and that you've been job searching since. Sometimes people put on their resume, and we typically recommend a chronological resume, but say you left the workforce in 2019, and then in parentheses, you might write next to the role, was laid off due to merger, or was laid off due to reduction force, or took a step, left workforce to care for children, or went into military service, something like that. So, because I think transparency is key. on the returnship side of things, I see a lot of people try to fill in with things to make it look like they're still working, but then they're not still working. And I think that if you organize your resume correctly and honestly, then you don't necessarily need to fill in a lot. I think if you're just very succinct and brief, if there is a necessity for a cover letter, a lot of online role, when you apply online, a lot of times they ask for a cover letter. You can go into a little bit more detail what you were doing in your break. If you were upskilling with technology, you took a class, you did volunteer work. I also recommend putting all of that on your resume in a separate section. So volunteer work, especially if you had a leadership position, I think that is huge. Any type of pro bono work, and then putting those dates. And so you can see very clearly what was paid and what was unpaid. And then in your summary at the top, you can kind of wrap it all with a bow and touching on the role, all the skills that you have, both volunteer, paid, all of that. Those are all still skills, but put that up at the top. For LinkedIn, I see a lot of people write CEO of household or COO of, my last name is Moss, maybe like Moss Incorporated. So I would recommend not doing that. I would recommend, again, on LinkedIn, you can have a little bit more creative freedom, but I would write something a little, again, very transparent, saying like, took a step back to raise my 2 children, have, loved being a stay-at-home mom, really excited to get back into the workforce, and pivot, make it really clear, transparent, but pivot to talking about, I really want to get back to a full-time work and, I'm ready to go.
Yeah. So, folks, I promise you, and my Riveter guarantee to you is we're going to give you specifics. I did my best here. You saw I tried very, very hard for specifics, but this is a place full of gray areas. So if I were to try to summarize, the advice here is there's not a specific rule of thumb of you do or you don't. However, transparency is super, super core. All 3 said, do not hide anything. Reality is what it is. And if you can tell a strong story around your reality versus hide your reality, you'll at least have a chance to address it instead of give somebody a bad taste in their mouth of, ooh, this person just, I don't understand why they had to hide that. So I would say, trying to summarize.
I have one thought on that transparency and that reality. And it's the same advice, whether it's, talking about the long-term search or the reason you were let go, perhaps, is you've got to get really, really succinct with telling that story. This is a perfect example of practice it in front of the mirror or on Riveter. And so that you can say it without any sense of embarrassment, without any sense of anger, without any sense of, you're just stating facts. Because again, if you start stumbling or making excuses, then you're telling a different story at that point. So just get to a point where you can be really, really succinct and clear, matter of fact about it, and then move on.
Yeah. So actually, let's use that for a moment to talk about talking about it, right? We said writing about it on LinkedIn or on your resume. Let's say talking about it. It comes up often. You're at an interview. Hey, tell me about this gap on your resume. What are some different ways somebody should talk about it? Lauren, I'm going to start with you because you talked about being succinct, which is very important, but give me as much of I know people might have reasons, 1,000 different reasons. They left for 10 years to parents. Somebody on here mentioned they had a disability and they were working on health issues for 10 years. Then they did a data science boot camp. They're looking to get back into work. Somebody got laid off a year ago. It's been a tough economy and it's just been a year. When that question comes up, tell me about a gap in your employment. What would you say is, or how do you coach your clients? And if you could be specific about, hey, for a client that looks like this, I would coach them to say this. What are some ways that they can talk about their gap on their resume in an interview with a recruiter screen, whatever?
Sure. So I'm going to focus it a little bit broader up front, and then we'll get down. So, the transparency is really key, and just getting really succinct. So I would go back to your branding. So how Mimi was talking earlier about getting feedback from people about what am I good at? Where do you see me? And the gap could be something where you can just state it. And, if you're taking time off to raise your kids, that's its own thing. If it's a longer term unemployment situation, it could be a different thing. But, I think you want to package this along with your personal brand as well. So it comes together and you're able to make a nice storyline all together about who you are, the value that you can bring to this organization, the problems that you can solve. And then, yes, I was away and here's, what I learned. Here's some of the challenges I experienced. Here's what's made me stronger since then. So to me, it's all encompassing in that personal brand where you want to create a story and you want to connect the dots really easily for people so that the hiring manager or the HR person doesn't have to figure out on their own how you're going to solve their problem when you've been out of the workforce for 10 years. You need to be super clear to make it easy for them, because the minute you have to make that, or the minute they have to think, that's the time that they're going to start creating worst case scenarios about your situation and why you're not a fit.
I agree. One of the things that I say in interview prep all the time is I use the acronym KISS. Keep it simple, stupid, right? I know we are all complex. I know we've all done a lot. I know our stories are wonderfully and rainbow, beautiful, wonderful things. However, if you make somebody think, like Lauren said, then they get confused. You got to kiss. You always got to be kissing. Keep it simple, stupid. Your story needs to be super clear. There's not a time to explain everything about your parenting style or how it's unfair that you were let go, or the fact that you almost had a job and then you didn't have a job and then you tried to that. Or Oprah season 6 was better than season 36, which we could talk about that later. I have very strong opinions about that. Point is that simplicity is very important. And I'm going to come to you with the opposite answer. When you talk to tons of job seekers on recruiter screens, making sure they're a fit for your clients, you've been doing that for 15 years. What are some mistakes that you see people make when you say, tell me about the gap on your resume, or I see your last job was a year ago. What have you been doing since? Or what have you been working on the last 6 months, or however you phrase it? What are some mistakes people might make?
Yeah, and I think it's gonna not be too surprising from what Lauren said, but some of this too is, are you interviewing with someone over the phone? Are you interviewing with someone face-to-face, video, that type of thing, and engaging, and especially if you're on the phone. I think number one is just the vomit, right? It's just the like blah 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 blah, like, oh my god, I finally got here and I just am going to tell you like everything. And I'm telling you that, like, in this day and age, somebody is checking email, looking at an alert, and as soon as you think you've lost someone, like if you're in a visual situation, and as soon as you think, oh gosh, it's okay to say, to just take a deep breath, stop, pause, and check in, and like, was this the right direction? Is this what you're going in? Which I think is not, it's just a skill that everybody needs. It's not just for people who are currently unemployed, but I would say that that's probably like the number one mistake that people make, or they go like so far back, right? Where it's like, how relevant, if you're not telling me something that is relevant to you doing the job that I need filled, then like, I can't, like you gotta keep it focused, keep it positive, right? Like, I don't want to hear about what a negative, horrible experience and how rotten your children are. Like, I want to hear, something that's more positive and forward thinking. And so, that I think is probably really important. I'm trying to think if there's other mistakes that people make. I think those are really length and positivity. And, it is a time that if you are just like, the story is important, right? But if there's, for some reason, like we're on sales, right? When we're in this job, and if you can find a way to connect it, right, which is what you're trying to do, like, that's a great opportunity to say, to not answer that question the same way to everybody. But if one client really needs super strong organizational skills, then like, talk about your super strong organizational skills, right? And that find a way to connect that. So
yeah, that positivity, man, that is so important. So succinctness we talked about on Riveter. So when you practice your answers, there's a 2-minute time limit. And a lot of people complain about that 2-minute time limit. They're like, my story is more complex. I need 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 12 minutes. Well, folks, this is why we have a 2-minute time limit, because if you're talking for more than 2 minutes, everyone's getting bored. I mean,
yeah.
half of you are bored hearing me talk for 15 seconds. I get it. You got to keep them short. You got to keep it succinct. And that positivity is so important, because if you're tired, if you're exhausted, if you just don't feel like doing another one of these freaking things anymore, they don't want to hire you, because nobody wants to work with someone who's tired and exhausted, no matter what the reasons are there. I mentioned we talk about parenting. I want to ask about skill sets gained during unemployment or non-traditional employment. We'll start with parenting, and we'll talk about kind of just more traditional unemployment. We'll start with Mimi for this one. So Mimi, what are some of we talked very briefly about the main skills, things like multitasking, or things like bringing in a diversity of thought, or things like that. How would you coach somebody to talk about skills gained as a parent when it comes to an interview, right? Let's say you get to an interview, some companies got some, maybe you had a networking in, or maybe a company has a diversity thing that they're trying to, quota that they're trying to meet, and they're trying to get people with diverse backgrounds in there. And then it's your chance to say, all right, I've been raising kids for 15 years, but I still got it. Like, I'm thinking of one particular person on this call who's probably the most impressive person I've met at Riveter. She's an absolute bombshell, and being able to figure out how to take these skills that she's gained in 10 or 15 years of raising people and bring it into a very, very, very high-end corporate professional environment that she's in. How do you encourage people to talk about those skills and then bring it into the interview?
That's great. That's a great question. I think that you can also include anything else you've done during your break, in addition to raising humans, I think is really valuable to add. Leadership positions. So I always encourage people, if you're asked a question about a time, like a behavioral interview question, when you did this thing at work, say, what, I actually don't have an example like that that's recent. Is it okay if I use an example from the time I was taking a break? And go there. Ask the permission, and no one will say no typically. Say, here's an example when I organized this event. Here's an example, when I had multiple priorities and I had to delegate all this responsibility. Yes, it could be at your kid's school, it could be at a charity event, something like that. And I think that keeping it really positive, and if you haven't been able to upskill or taken a class or learned how to use Outlook or Microsoft Teams or Slack or something like that, and if you haven't done any of those things and you have only been able to raise humans, which is, trust me, I do it, it's tons of work, then to focus on the skills like look, I understand that I haven't been in the workforce for 15 years, but here's what I did learn. I learned how to juggle multiple priorities. I learned how to be able to run events. I learned how to be able to delegate. I understand the different types of people that work at this company. Some are in their 20s, some are in their 30s, some are interns. And here are the ways that I relate to people. And here is how I can connect with people. And here's why I'm great. And so kind of like taking that approach and keeping it really positive, as Anne and Lauren have both stated, keeping it positive, and excited and confident. So you have to, that has to show too, and try not to think about, oh my gosh, well, I'm talking about teenagers. How does that have anything to do with these project managers that I'm supposed to be working with? But
there's a lot more similarities than you think.
Yeah. There are a lot more. So all of those things, especially, interpersonal skills and multitasking, project management, and that's kind of the advice that I would give there.
Yeah, Lauren, I want to go to you with something tangential. When people are unemployed for a long time or out of the workforce due to parenting, layoffs, anything else, they're looking to get into a job that's at the seniority level that they left or higher. They don't want to take a step back. as that time period goes on longer and longer, and a bit of frustration, desperation kicks in due to financial reasons, or just the exhaustion of searching every day and not working on something and putting your valuable skills to work, become considerations of going a little bit more junior. For the people you work with and coach, how do you think about going a little bit more junior versus holding out for that one thing? Let's put finance to the side for a moment because, well, no, actually, you know what? That's unfair. Finance is a huge part of it. How do you talk to people about maybe going more junior than they want to if it's been a long time, or holding out for something at the level that they want?
Yeah, well, like everything, it depends. So my first suggestion is, which might not be possible for some of the people on this call, but for people who are entering kind of an unemployment situation, one of the things that I advise people to do when they're kind of in fear mode, so whether that's in you're first unemployed, or you start to get frustrated or fearful that this is going to go on forever, is one technique is to imagine the worst case scenario. And so what is the worst case scenario for you? I mean, literally, you run out of money, or you can't afford to pay your house note, or come up with what is a legitimate worst case scenario for you. And then that takes it from being kind of this gray thundercloud of fear, which creates that pit in your stomach, and you're using the reptile part of your brain, to then we're actually analyzing this. We're using the front part of our brain. We're being much more analytical about it. And then you can start, okay, so what do I need to do to make sure that worst case doesn't happen? And then you can start to plan. And again, when you're in planning mode, when you're using the front part of your brain, you're much less in that fear mode, but you're in more of a productive space. And so, from a very tactical standpoint, that's a great exercise, because then you can start to think through, okay, when I hit this point, then I need to start being willing to accept whatever I can get. Or maybe, hey, I can financially afford to go on for 2 years, so I'm okay. Or maybe that point comes a whole lot sooner. So I suggest that there's no one time that people should start to think like, okay, now is the time. But everyone has a lot of different factors that go into those kinds of decisions. And as best as possible, see if you can pre-plan some of those decisions, so you're not in a state of desperation. We helped one person who, the last time she was unemployed, she lost her house. So the first thing she did the next time around when she got laid off was she sold her house. And we tried to say, hold on, before you go right down. But for her, that was just, I'm not going to be out of control to that extent ever again. And so I'm going to retain the control.
There's a terrific TED Talk that does that whole fear, like lays out your biggest fear. I'll have to send it to you guys. It's totally awesome. I do think that, just super quickly, one thing, I know we only have 1 minute, but some of the whole, it's really interesting how sometimes people kind of get stuck on like the title piece of it, but look sideways, right? So like if you were a director at a 400-person company, what does a senior director look like at a 100-person company, right? And so thinking strategically about what skill set could you bring, or maybe you go to a larger company with a lower title, but you're getting different exposure. Like it's a really complex piece, but you gotta look kind of sideways, and up and down is okay if it's different, right? Like, what are you learning? It's not forever. You're not marrying this job. just taking it. So anyway,
Absolutely.
I'm done.
Well, hey, thank you so much to everybody. I mentioned we're going to do something very specific, so give me 60 more seconds if you can. What I would love folks to do, we talked a lot about communication. We talked a lot about practice. I'm going to give you a link. That's going to take you to this question within Riveter. Tell me about this gap in your employment. If you don't have a Riveter account, it's totally free, always will be. Feel free to use it and you'll be able to practice. What you'll see here is how one person, and I'm actually going to go answer this because I've had a 6-month gap on my resume before, and you'll be able to watch how this individual answered the question, learn from their answer, and then whenever you're ready, click here and practice your own answer, or click here, practice your own answer, and practice your answer to this question. You'll have a 2-minute time limit. It's going to be hard. It's going to be uncomfortable. You can keep it entirely private if you want. Nobody will ever see it except for you. Or if you'd like, you could share it and click the public button, and it'll just be available to Riveter members to watch, give you feedback on, learn from, and then you can take it down and make it private again a little bit later. So my one actionable thing, take all the conversation of what we talked about today, come into this link that I'm about to drop in here, and then try to practice your one specific, concise answer, as Lauren, Mimi, and Ann told us about. Tell me about this gap in your employment. I'm going to go practice this as well. So Lauren, Ann, and Mimi, in that order, tell us very briefly if someone wanted to reach out to you, had more questions, wanted to learn more about your organizations or businesses, where should they go?
I welcome you to connect with me on LinkedIn. I am very active on it, and you can reach me. I put it in the chat earlier, and I also do a weekly LinkedIn Live about career topics too.
Awesome. So find Lauren on LinkedIn. You'll all get an email with this recording shortly, and it'll have Lauren, Ann, and Mimi's LinkedIn's and business websites as well. And if people want to reach out,
Absolutely.
What should they do?
Find me on LinkedIn for sure. I will tell you, I encourage follow-ups. I'd love to tell you that I'm on top of everything, but I'm not. So if I welcome an opportunity for you all to follow up if you don't hear back in a timely fashion. But I absolutely reach out. I'd love to. I'm not just specifically in the recruiting space anymore, but am totally connected and happy to help out where I can.
Beautiful. And Mimi?
LinkedIn for sure. Connect with me. I'd love to do that. And then our website is reachhire.com/ and look at the job section. We have over 60 roles right now we're recruiting for. So in, I think, 5 different locations in the US. So please do check that out for returnship opportunities. That might be a good fit.
And very important, because I made this mistake when sending you an email, Mimi, Reach Hire only has 1 H. So that's right. I just realized there's an email that I sent you yesterday that never got to you. It's just 1 H, REACHIRE, hire.com. Awesome, folks. Again, here's the link to go practice your answer. Paul said it. He recommends that you make it public so we can all support each other, watch each other's answers, give each other feedback, help each other out. Makes a very nice, strong community. I'm going to go log off and practice. Mimi, Ann, and Lauren, thank you so much, folks. Let's give them a muted round of applause. Really loud so that they can hear you over the mute. Thank you so much for joining us. There you go, Barbara. That's what I'm talking about. Thank you so much for joining us today. This was a blast on a very tough topic. So thank you. Thank you all for joining us in this interesting conversation on something sensitive and emotional and personal. I'm really proud of you all for making it here. Look forward to seeing you on Riveter, online, at future events, anywhere. Thank you everyone for joining. Have an amazing rest of your Thursday.
Thanks.
Bye guys.
Thank you.